Released in 2013, DmC Devil May Cry is a reboot of the Devil May Cry series that aimed to reimagine the plot and characters laid out in previous titles while maintaining similar combat mechanics and gameplay. With a different studio heading up development as well, it would take a pretty remarkable game to please existing fans of the then 12-year-old series. From my perspective, this was easily the entry in the Devil May Cry series that I was most nervous to play. Obvious changes to the characters aside, I didn't know how a fresh reboot of the series would sit with me after completing the first 4 Devil May Cry games and absolutely loving them. Except for Devil May Cry 2, of course.
No. Devils never cry.
But...
So, does the reboot carry on the stylish spirit of its predecessors? Are the rebooted characters really as bad as they appear? Does the combat still feel complex yet incredibly satisfying? Let's find out as we dive into the 5th part of a 6-part series where I document my experience with each Devil May Cry title. My name's Johnny Bueno, and this is Unnecessary or Underrated, a DmC Devil May Cry review. DmC Devil May Cry, which I'll just refer to as DmC Reboot for the rest of this review, casts you as Dante, who appears to be loosely based on Dante from the Devil May Cry series. Dante is now trailer trash who resides in a very grimy modern-day city known as Limbo City. He's then recruited by his brother in blue Virgil to fight against the demons that inhabit a parallel plane of existence known as Limbo, with the ultimate goal of defeating their king and apparently sleazy bald CEO, Mundus. In that brief description of DmC Reboot's plot, we've got 3 big names that were prevalent in past titles. So, how do the rebooted personas live up to the originals? Well, they don't really. One of the first things that really stuck out to me when starting the game was how completely different the new Dante is. He's vulgar, abrasive, edgy, and lacks the charm the character's past iterations had. He has some of the same cockiness as original Dante, but that's just overshadowed just by how repulsive Reboot Dante is.
Just be careful. You can get rough in there.
I like it rough.
They dialed up the edginess too much in my opinion, but he does get some character development later in the game that makes him a little more tolerable. I just think there's a certain level of charm and style that makes Dante, well, Dante. And this guy doesn't have any of that. I also think it says a lot when Dante from 2005 seemingly aged better than Dante from 2013.
Ooh, I love a fast woman.
Shut up!
Virgil might actually be worse because he's almost nothing like his original counterpart. It's like they completely ignored what made Virgil great, being the lone wolf powerhouse that I've grown to love over the course of the series. Reboot Virgil does almost nothing over the course of the game except hack a few computers and serve as a device to push Dante along in the plot. There's nothing imposing or even special about Reboot Virgil. He's just incredibly bland, and I found that beyond disappointing as he's arguably one of the best characters in the entire series. I will actually argue that Reboot Mundus has more depth than the original, but that's because the original didn't have much depth to begin with. The same goes for Kat, the token female newcomer that appears in each Devil May Cry game. She got much more character development than past female sidekicks, maybe aside from Lady, as she actively plays a role in helping Dante with her psychic powers as they navigate through Limbo City. The setting of Limbo City itself is fine. I actually didn't mind it. As different as it was, I liked how there's a separate realm of Limbo where Dante does battle, as it gives the game more of a paranormal aspect that I found super interesting and in some cases visually stunning. I think this gave the setting a lot more character and mystery as it's a realm that overlaps with reality rather than being a completely separate place, letting you see how Dante's battles directly affect the human world. DmC Reboot takes you through largely the same game structure as the original series. You'll play through the game in a mission-based structure, and you're graded on your performance at the end of each mission. Your grade is based on how quickly you completed the level, and the spiciness of your combos among other things, and the higher your grade, the better your reward. One thing DmC Reboot does much differently is its focus on exploration and gathering collectibles. There are entities called Lost Souls peppered throughout each level that you can find and destroy to improve your score at the end of each mission. Some you'll find right in front of you as you progress through a mission, and some require a little bit more platforming to reach. This also includes searching for the various keys and their corresponding doors you'll come across in each level, which unlocks the game's secret missions, which I found to be far easier than in previous games. Honestly, I was on the fence about this. On one hand, finding these collectibles offered a nice break between combat encounters to just chill out and find some hidden groaning dude stuck to a wall. But on the other hand, it can lead to sometimes lengthy interruptions when all you really want to do is blitz through a level and kill as many demons as possible. The latter of those two does feel like the more true Devil May Cry experience, but honestly I didn't mind the former either, especially when the platforming in this game does feel really smooth. Reboot Dante has the ability to pull himself to grapple points using the left trigger or pull objects to him with the right trigger, in addition to being able to perform a short glide. You'll need to use these abilities effectively to reach some of the trickier areas, but it did feel incredibly fluid and is the first time in the series I somewhat enjoyed the platforming. Something that I have to point out with my experience playing the DmC Reboot is that this is probably one of the buggier Devil May Cry games I've played to date. I did encounter a few minor bugs here and there, but I also encountered a pretty major bug early on where the game's first boss kind of just stopped moving. He stopped doing everything actually, so I just chilled with him for a bit to see if he would sort it out, and nope, the boss completely broke. Obviously this wasn't a great thing to see so early on in the game, but fortunately this was the only boss this happened with. I'm not going to waste any time in saying that I actually love DmC Reboot's combat. Pause combos are still there, allowing Dante to perform different combos based on how you delay his strikes, but there's an added level of fluidity when it comes to weapon swapping that makes stringing multi-weapon combos together both satisfying and simple. Holding down the right trigger equips Dante's demon weapons, which excel at focusing down single targets, while holding down the left trigger equips Dante's angel weapons, which are better for hitting multiple enemies at once. While not holding either trigger, Dante simply uses his iconic Rebellion sword, which returns with most of its iconic moves. DmC Reboot gave me these seamless weapon transitions that I didn't even know I wanted when playing previous titles. You could begin attacking with Rebellion, swap to the heavier hitting Arbiter, then swap to the AoE sweeping Osiris, then back to Rebellion without missing a beat. This compares to past titles where you would simply cycle through your available weapons using the shoulder buttons. DmC Reboot gives you a much more fast swap style of combat that just worked, and honestly I wish previous titles used the same system. Even a Devil May Cry noob like myself was able to string together some pretty wild looking combos and achieve a high style score with ease. I think it's very friendly for new players of the series, but with a high enough skill ceiling that veteran players could get plenty of enjoyment out of. I did like the weapon variety as well, with my personal favorite being the big axe called the Arbiter. I'm just a big fan of slow, heavy weapons that hit like a truck and send enemies flying. Dante also gets a shuriken-style angel weapon that can strike enemies at a much longer range and spin on enemies to keep them stun-locked for a short amount of time. Both of these weapons are also effective against shielded enemies, so there's more practicality to them than just simply doing damage. Much like previous games, you'll need to pick the right tool for the job if you want to slay some demons in the most effective way possible. One thing that I was incredibly happy to see carried over from Devil May Cry 4 was the ability to pull enemies toward you, or you to them, to keep the flow of your combos going. Much like Nero's demon arm in that game, Dante can now do the same with some demonic chain thing in this game. This was one of my favorite combat features when I played Devil May Cry 4, as I found it to be incredibly satisfying to drag enemies to you after finishing one off so you don't lose any momentum with your style score. This works particularly well with the flying enemies you'll encounter, so you don't have to deal with the nuisance of them hovering around you and hitting you with pot shots while being just out of reach. One thing I have to point out is the lack of a manual lock-on button. Combat is done through an auto lock-on system that, for the most part, I didn't have too many issues with. But it did lead to some awkward controls when, for example, I tried to perform Dante's signature Stinger ability by tapping the joystick forward twice with the attack button, rather than just locking on and doing it once like before. This led to me dropping some of my combos a few times here and there, but I don't believe it ruined the overall combat experience for me. DmC Reboot's enemies are actually pretty cool and unique in their own way, serving as more than just punching bags for Dante. I like how every new enemy type you encounter gets a little introduction scene to show you that you'll be going up against something that you haven't seen yet. Enemies will often show up in waves as well, forcing you to stay on your toes as the game might throw several different types of enemies at you in a single encounter. While there are several basic enemies you can thrash around with ease, there are some that can only be damaged by Dante's demon or angel weapons, forcing you to familiarize yourself with weapons that you may not normally use. As I mentioned earlier, my favorite weapon was the Arbiter, which I found myself using for most of the game. But some of the enemies are completely immune to damage from it, as it's considered a demon weapon, so I was forced to improve my skills with Dante's angel weapons like Osiris. Every weapon has a specific use, and that's something I really enjoyed about the DmC Reboot. This also does a great job of guiding you along one of the main rules of the series. You can't just mash buttons to beat the game. This comes into play somewhat frequently, as you'll often find yourself confronted with enemies holding a shield, which the heavier hitting demonic weapons excel at breaking. Your strikes will simply get deflected if you attack with any other weapon. Similarly, the witch enemies are surrounded by a blue bubble which can be chipped away at with most weapons, but Dante's Aquila angel weapon is by far the most efficient at breaking her shield. The game actually lets you know this through a pop-up, and it does the same thing for other special enemies, which I think ruined a bit of the discovery with the game. Previous games just kind of left you to figure out the enemy's weaknesses yourself, and it felt super satisfying when you did. DmC Reboot's bosses were honestly nothing special though. Some of them were cool to look at from a spectacle standpoint, but overall they weren't that difficult as they all had well-telegraphed attacks that were easy to dodge and punish. As an example, the fight against whatever the hell this is essentially has you smacking a giant fetus until its weak point shows. It does a few sweeping attacks and some wave attacks, but didn't feel like there was much beyond that. I was just mindlessly smacking this poor thing until he revealed his mommy for a further beating. The fight against Bob Barbas is essentially just a jumping puzzle where you dodge lasers, hit a big button, and then smack him in the face before doing it all over again. Again, super cool to look at, but it didn't feel very intuitive in design, nor did it feel very Devil May Cry. I want to go toe-to-toe and trade blows with massive demons, not play bop it. Maybe I was missing something, but I really missed how in previous games you were rewarded for your aggression with bosses. If you were able to hit a boss hard enough while effectively dodging their attacks, you could put them in a stagger state, allowing for further punishment. It didn't appear that DmC Reboot had that feature. Bosses would get staggered, but it seemed to happen at more scripted moments, which made it feel like it didn't matter how fast I was able to string together a high damage combo, as I was going to reach that stagger point regardless. I think being rewarded for your own efforts is far more satisfying, especially for those who have mastered the game's combat and boss fight mechanics. Oh, and without revealing too much, I will say the final boss fight does make up for some of the weaker ones. Easily the best boss fight in the entire game. To sum up my experience with the DmC Reboot, let's take a look at what the game excelled at and where it fell short. For the positives, the combat felt more fluid than ever and has the best iteration of weapon swapping yet, allowing for seamless combos. The weapons themselves are really cool and each have their own specific purpose when fighting enemies and traversing each level. Limbo City and the realm of Limbo itself give the game a pretty cool modern paranormal feel that the previous games didn't have. Enemy encounters are all fairly unique and have you testing your prowess with each weapon type. And platforming actually feels good for the first time in the series. For the negatives, the twins are ruined. I was not a fan of Trailer Trash Dante or Nice Guy Virgil. Bosses, except for the final boss, aren't very intuitive and felt far easier to defeat than in previous games. The game straight up tells you how to beat certain enemies, losing the sense of discovery from previous titles. Auto lock-on can be a little frustrating to deal with at times, leading to frustrating combat experiences. And it is somewhat buggy, with myself encountering a major bug early on in the game. DmC Devil May Cry is a notoriously divisive reboot for a series that didn't need a reboot, but that doesn't necessarily make it a bad game. Despite its flaws in character design, it manages to excel in carrying the torch for the series' iconic combat, giving us arguably one of the smoothest iterations yet. So, from my experience, I would argue that it is underrated for the most part. It's just the boss fights and character redesigns that were unnecessary. And it really is a shame because you spend the majority of the game with the two characters that were done the dirtiest. But, that being said, I was genuinely surprised by this reboot as I enjoyed my time playing it far more than I thought I would. Now, there's only one game left in the 6-part journey I embarked on nearly 2 months ago, Devil May Cry 5. As much as I had fun with the DmC reboot, I'm ready for a return to form with the real Dante and Friends to experience what I've heard is the most stunning game in the entire series. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and please let me know what you think in the comments below. The next video will be the final one in the series, but there will be plenty more exciting content to come. So subscribe if you want to see more, and thanks for watching.